Hi, hello, this is Arjun R. Shaankar and welcome to LearnStroke. All the aspirants are busy preparing for the 2021 Prelims examination. They are covering all the major important topics, the basic subjects as well as current affairs. So we at LearnStroke, we thought that we'll come up with a series exclusively for the current affairs to help you for the 2021 Prelims, especially the current affairs topics are concerned. So we thought of coming up with a concept called as Prelims Relay. Exactly, the word sounds absolutely correct. We are coming up with something called as the Prelims Relay, where we are giving you the basic overview or a quick current affairs wrap up of the last 1 year, which is going to be an important topic for your prelims examination current affairs for 2021. So basically, the current affairs section is the most dynamic area which people find it very difficult to study. A lot of people find it very difficult because they don't even know from which area the questions are being asked for the prelims examination, and this is a big challenge for all the aspirants who are writing the exam because you don't know where the questions come from. That is a big challenge. So we thought of giving you a current affairs relay, which is going to be a current affairs wrap up for the 1 year, and this wrap up is exclusively coming from Press Information Bureau, which is a document, which is a portal which normally people miss out, exclude from their preparation. And we found that PIB contains a lot of original releases of the Government of India regarding all the ministries. So it's important that we know some of the most important current affairs from PIB. That is why this effort is totally directed to give you a current affairs wrap up. So this is going to be the prelims current affairs relay for 2021, and this session is going to be the part 1 or set 1, where we'll introduce the major topics that appeared in the PIB and in the current affairs, and we'll give you an overview which will help you for a quick revision for this 2021 prelims examination. So let's take a close look at how we are going to proceed. Let's check the topics one by one. Let's discuss the first topic, which is called as the Lighthouse Project or the LHPs. How many of you have heard about this project? So everybody must have heard about Lighthouse, but what is this Lighthouse Project? This is the most important one. As you see here, you see a house. So as you see, the house is the key word. Construction of houses to the needy people by 2022. It's an important target. So in this, you need to accelerate the speed of housing. That is the most important part. And Government of India has launched this project called as the Lighthouse Project or the LHP. What are the areas that we have to discuss in light? We have to discuss an important concept of LHP. And what do you mean by the concept of GHTC? The Prime Minister Awas Yojana. What do you mean by Prime Minister Awas Yojana? Which is also a very important topic here. The GHTC and a concept called as Navariti. What do you mean by Navariti? What if we get a questions in the prelims? Because you don't know what are the type of questions that UPSC will ask in the exam. And a lot of people believe that, okay, these are the popular questions and we need to only study current affairs. When it comes to current affairs, we'll only study that. But UPSC is very unpredictable. You don't know what they will ask. What if you get a question? Which of the following statements or Navaritiv is something that appeared in the news recently is associated with what? So we have to deal with Navaritiv, and there is a concept of Asha India. So what are these concepts? We need to study about all these concepts in this concept called Lighthouse Project. So let's take a close look at all the concepts and let's identify by one. And let's see. The Lighthouse Project comes under GHTC, which means this time you can see that GHTC means the Global Housing Technology Challenge. That's the most important point here. So GHTC basically means Global Housing Technology Challenge. What does this GHTC basically contain? And after some time we'll understand that GHTC is basically a set of technologies which has got an eco-friendly type of constructions, which has got a sustainable type of construction, and the most important, GHTC technology sets includes disaster resilient. That's a key word in this, disaster resilient. So Lot of things to pick out from this. And so next is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban, which is called as a PMAY mission. That is also very important in this. And here comes the concept that we just discussed, called as Navariti, which means new, affordable, validated research innovation technologies for Indian housing. This was a question which I said, what if they ask a question, which of the following or Navariti appeared in the news? What do you mean by that? This is something that makes it important. And some of the techniques which they talk about, the techniques may not be important, but it's just a part of this. Prefabricated sandwich panel system, precast concrete system are all important. And Asha India program, the campaign, GHTC is all important in this regard, which basically put forwards a lot of research like this. You can see a modern housing technology within the country. So Asha India plays a very pivotal part, and you need to remember the concept called as Navariti and the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and the concept of LHC as well as GHTC. So these are the most important areas which they talk about. And let's discuss the other important concept called as Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. PMAY is important, and this was launched by 25th June 2015. So that is, if you get a prelims question, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Which ministry houses this? It is actually implemented by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, or the MOHUA. So it's 2015 was the year when it came in. And as you said, 2022, all the eligible urban households and households should be getting a Pakka house. This is what is being said. And GHTC, as I said, GHTC talks about the most, it is a basket of innovative construction technology. That's why I said they talk about a construction technology, and what are the most important areas that are sustainable, eco-friendly and disaster resilient. So these are the important topic that you will remember about when you hear the concept of LHP or the lighthouse product. Remember that this is very important, and this individual topic has a lot of sub points like PMAY, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, GHTC, Navarit, Asha India, and a lot of concepts. This is very important. So this was the first topic which we discussed, and let's take a close look at the next important topic which comes here is geotagging. You must have already heard about this concept called as geotagging. What do you mean by geotagging? Because you can derive a few things from this. Geotagging means, obviously you will derive a concept of geography is already involved, and your location is already involved. And in these days, photos, videos, everything has got a locational aspect for it. That means you attach the location information into what is called as a geography metadata, because location matters a lot. So you must have seen the photos, videos, everything has got a locational aspect. And in this geotagging, it's very important that you attach the location information to the geographical metadata. And basically that data includes nothing but latitude, longitudes and different coordinates where you can coordinate all together. So that means the process of attaching the locational information to the geographical metadata is called as the concept of geotagging. And let's check how things work here. Geotagging is the process of attaching location information in the form of geographical metadata to an important point called as digital media, websites, videos and photographs. That is a key point here. That is an important point here. And then geotags may be also applied to digital output, social media, tweets, status, etc. And the key point here which comes here, it consists of latitude, longitude coordinates, altitude bearing, distance, accuracy, place name, perhaps a timestamp, everything is actually geotagged. So this was also something that appeared on the current affairs, especially we are discussing it from a random area. So geotagging is also a very important area. National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, or the NPPA, that is very important here, which has appeared many times in the news in the last 1 year, and especially in the wake of COVID-19. And as you must have seen in the picture, it is all about drugs NPPA is very important. So we need to take a key important things from this, and after discussing this, we'll discuss something called as PCPIR. What do you mean by PCPIR? Something very much related to the petrochemical industry, petrol industry. What do you mean by PCPIR? We'll discuss what you mean by PCPIR, which appeared in the news. So what are the key things that we have to discuss under this segment? You need to discuss something called as API. What is an API? And you must have heard about something called KSM. So which of the following statements regarding API are correct? And which of the following regarding statements regarding KSM are correct? And we need to talk about the drug industry, especially with the relation of API. We'll also discuss from the angle of China. We need to accept one thing where we'll study that in order to make drugs, we need basic raw materials or chemical compounds which are called as API, which are called as the basic chemical compounds. To create any medicines, you need raw materials. And you'll not even believe that India has to depend mostly, almost to 70% on China to get all the related raw materials for creating drugs in India. So even to make crocin, you need to depend on China. That is a health situation that is actually coming up in India. So in this context, you need to discuss what are API and what are KSM, which are called as the building blocks of drug industry. They are basically intermediates, which is building blocks in the drug industry. So we'll have to find out about API, KSM, and the angle of drug making in China. So let's take a close look at that. So we have said enough about a lot of things before starting the topic. So before that, one more thing. What if you get a question or a statement in your prelims examination that the Indian pharmaceutical industry is the second largest industry in the world by its volume? Whether it is true or false. A lot of people have a big problem in solving questions like this, because if you take a close look at last 3 years paper, 3 years preliminary paper, you will find out that such statements have always confused people. So in this regard, with a close idea regarding this, let's take a close look at how the things works. The Indian pharmaceutical industry is the third largest in the world by its volume. That is something that you have to note. And in the rise of COVID, I forgot to tell you one more thing. What do you mean by heparin? People from medical background and backgrounds related to health will easily know the importance of heparin, because basically heparin is a blood thinner. And in the wake of COVID-19, heparin is getting very, very popular. So it is in the news. That is why I mentioned about a concept called heparin. So heparin is used as a blood thinner, and it's a COVID plus medicine and widely used for COVID-19 treatment. So heparin makes it important. And here comes the important concept called as key starting materials, which is called as KSM, because I had already marked something called as KSM, and drug intermediates and active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is called as API. What if you get a question in your prelims, which of the following statements regarding API are correct? So let's take a close look at what you mean by API. Yes, and these are the scenarios which I already told you, because India is, as you can see, crocin, even for making crocin, India is largely dependent on China. And you can take a close look. As I previously said, API are also called as the bulk drugs, and they are the keywords, they are the raw materials to create drugs. And basically API are chemical compounds. They are chemical compounds, and in order to make a drug, you need to understand that in order to make a drug, you need two important aspects. One is called as an API, and the second is called as an excipient, which are basically inactive. So you need an active API and an inactive excipient. So you can see, in order to create a crocin, paracetamol is the API of crocin. And paracetamol is one such thing which reduces your fever and headache, so fever, etc. So basically API means they are raw materials and called as bulk drugs. So let's check it out. It's a chemical compound or a raw material And API produces, you can just take a clue, API produces the intended effects to cure the disease. So API plays a pivotal role, and paracetamol is the API, and which gives the relief from body ache and fever, etc., which we discussed just now. And every medicine is made up of two parts, which I said is an active chemical API as well as an inactive excipient. So that makes us important here. And what do you mean by key starting material called as KSM? As I said, they are actually building blocks of drug industry, and India imports large number of KSMs from China, and they are basically intermediates used for pharmaceutical industry. So that makes it API and KSM very, very important in the context. So this has appeared in the news, and it has appeared in the current affairs many times. So let's discuss. You need to find out more things also. Yes, I think we'll move on to the other important area, which I said is PCPIR. What do you mean by PCPIR? And I gave you a clue. It's related to the petrochemical industry. And let's see. The PCPIR means petrochemical investment regions, and it is already implemented in the states. Remember, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Orissa, Tamil Nadu. So if you get a prelims question, which of the following places in India are connected by a PCPIR? So basically, when you hear PCPIR, you need petrochemical investment regions, and in India you have connected by Andhra Pradesh, Visakhapatnam, Gujarat, Orissa and Tamil Nadu. And why PCPIR? Basically, they are integrated in an environment friendly manner. It promotes petrochemicals and petroleum. So basically, it promotes petrochemical industry in a much more environmental friendly manner. So PCPIR region, please remember all this concept. And what if we get a question like this? It's called E-Urvarak. What do you mean by E-Urvarak? If you get a question like this, it's a fertilizer dashboard. So if you get a question, E-Urvarak is actually related to what? The answer is very simple. It is related to fertilizers. So that makes it another important area. So remember all the areas: API, KSM, etc. The next important area is Central Consumer Protection Authority, and it has been appearing in the news many times. But this time, I chose this because of a suo motu case reference. Because this authority has got a suo motu power to take cases only because of misleading advertisements. That is, as you can see in the image, in the time of Corona or the COVID, TV, television were flooded with advertisement. Use this soap, use this hand wash, everything. Use this water purifier, Corona will be dead. So misleading advertisement, as you see, is an area to charge. So this time, the Central Consumer Protection Authority took charge suo motu with misleading advertisements. Advertisements, most often advertisement like this, were booked, and in this regard, you need to take a close look at it. And do you think Central Consumer Protection Authority Act came into existence in which year? And do you think in 1986 there was another thing? Do you think it replaced it in 2019? Let's find it out. That is what we have to find it out. The CPA has suo motu issued show cause notices to companies like water purifiers, paints, floor cleaners, etc., which came up with misleading advertisement. That is the point here. And the most important area, the authority is being constituted in Section 10 of the Consumer Protection Act 2019. So this authority that we talk is coming under Section 10 of Consumer Protection Act 2019. And what did it replace? The Act replaced the Consumer Protection Act of 1986. And the Central Consumer Protection Authority, the CPA, is appearing in many times. So this was relating to the misleading advertisement. The most important point that you'll remember is 1986 and the Act and the formation. That is something to be noted here. And let's discuss the another important area which appeared in the news is ammonical nitrogen pollution or the ammonia pollution. What do you mean by ammonia? You must have learnt in your lower classes. It's called NH3. It has a compound. It is actually containing nitrogen and hydrogen as a byproduct. So basically, the pollution of nitrogen, hydrogen. how does nitrogen pollution or the ammonia pollution is creating a big problem. How do you think nitrogen pollution or ammonia pollution happens? Most often you can see it happens from human slurry. You can see from human slurry, from biomass, and even from factories. All these are sources which creates all this. So where can you trace this? So ammonical nitration or ammonical pollution, where do you think can this create a big concept? You can see it happens not only within the human waste, it also happens with industries, and let's take a close look. It also happens in the process called as volatilization. What do you mean by volatilization? And even in your engines, which are called as the catalytic converters, creates this. And decomposition of waste in the oceans. Oceans also adds up to the ammonia pollution. So humans, industries, volatilization, catalytic converters in the engines, ocean, and even forest fires, that are very important. Especially you must have heard about the Amazon. The Amazon forest fires can release a lot of ammonia, and something called as biomass combustion. What do you mean by biomass combustion? So ammonia pollution is very popular. In short, I've given you many things, and now let's see one by one. Is the pollution is a compound of nitrogen and hydrogen, which is a byproduct, which I told you. And the common forms includes ammonia gas and fertilizing factories, slurry, etc. Something which we discussed. And agriculture, you can see livestock waste from artificial fertilizer, which we discussed. Decomposition of waste is something that we also discussed. Combustion of biogas, organic matter, which includes ammonia. Forest fires or forest biomass burning, which is Amazon is a very popular example of that. Catalytic converters in engines, they release ammonia as a byproduct. Human waste again contributes ammonia, which is via volatilization. This is the concept of ammonical nitrogen pollution. So next time you see different type of pollutions, you might get an option for the prelims examination. Which of the following causes release of ammonia? They can give you a clear-cut option: livestock, catalytic converters, volatilization, combustion of biomass. Which of the following releases ammonia, nitrogen, or creates a nitrogen pollution? Most often when you get a question and the words like livestock, combustion of biomass, catalytic converters, and volatilization, people get confused. So all of the above is the answer. DRDO is an important area right now, because if you read newspapers, you will come across this organization, a premier organization, which is called Defense Research and Development Organization, the Defense R&D organization, which creates cutting edge military solutions. That is the word. It creates cutting edge military solutions, military technology, which are path breaking. So in this regard, every time when you read DRDO, you will find a lot of milestones or some of the most important things which DRDO has created for this country. And in this regard, let's take a close look at this. Know something about DRDO, when it came into existence. And 1958 is the year which DRDO came into existence, and from that point of time, it has been giving cutting edge technologies to Indian defense. And this year, 2021, people talk about make in India, create more things in India. The most thrust of DRDO is an important word called as export, because this can even be an important term for the mains. When you get a question for defense, you can easily write about all this. 2021 is more oriented towards export, because you need to create more indigenous technologies in India. So this is about DRDO, which they talk about. And we have discussed about DRDO in this concept. What do you mean by HSTDV? You get a question for your prelims. Which of the following regarding the statements relating to HSTDV are correct? What do you mean by HSTDV? Do you think it is a missile, or it is a carrier, or is this a weapon? You have to study about all these areas. And when you study about this concept called as, you must have heard about the speed, the supersonic as well as hypersonic. So in this concept we'll discuss how supersonic and hypersonic things works, and also something called, as you must have heard about a word called scramjet. You must have clearly heard about a word called scramjet. What are scramjets? What are their speeds? And something called as ramjets. In what speed does ramjet operate and what speed does scramjet operate? And what is the contribution of HST-DV? These are the important things that we have to discuss for the prelims current affair. Let's find out one by one. So DRDO, as we said, was established in 1958. Cutting edge technologies for militaries. The export is a major theme of 2021. And let's take a close look at this. HST-DV was a thing that we discussed. That means hypersonic technology demonstrator vehicle. Such words are very difficult to remember, but still you need to have a memory. At least you don't have to remember all this. Have a strong recognition effort, because recognize the word HST-DV. You don't have to remember it, but keep in mind, even if you forget HST-DV, when you remember DRDO, H stands for hypersonic. That will give you a clue. So hypersonic, so as I said, HST-DV is not a weapon. It is a carrier for hypersonic and long-range cruise missiles. Very important point. HST-DV may not be a weapon, it's a carrier to carry hypersonic and long-range cruise missiles. And it has got an air-breathing scramjet. What do you mean by an air-breathing scramjet? Because air-breathing scramjet basically means it can get the oxygen or the atmospheric oxygen for the propulsion. So you need to remember, these are the important things. It's an air-breathing scramjet. So basically, what is the difference between a scramjet and a ramjet? We are talking about scramjet and a ramjet. So previously, when you talk about the missile systems, you must have heard about a concept called Mach. Mach 3, that means the combustion level of supersonic range. Because normally missiles in ramjets, missiles go perfectly in supersonic speed up to Mach 3, it's absolutely clear. And after the supersonic level, when you reach the hypersonic level, the ramjet missile or the ramjet maneuverability actually decreases. So that means, in short, ramjet struggles to go in the hypersonic levels. That means scramjet can actually use the supersonic combustion levels as well as the hypersonic level. That means scramjets, the HST-DV, especially the missile system, that means with this speed you can penetrate any defense walls or any defense systems. So scramjets basically can be going up to Mach 6 times faster the sound, or the speed of sound. So scramjets can go up to Mach 6, and that is the difference between scramjet and ramjet. What if you get a question for your prelims? Which of the following are the difference between scramjet and ramjets? And which are the countries which are having this technology of HST-DV? Let's take a close look at it. A scramjet is it operates at hypersonic speeds. Ramjets operate at supersonic speeds. And basically the systems, let's take a close look at this. Scramjet, hypersonic speeds. Ramjet operates in supersonic speeds, and the speed and maneuverability is creating that most defense systems in the world. And you have United States of America, Russia and China, which is having this technology. If you get a question in the prelims, HST-DV is something that is hypersonic technology, is something that is having with United States, Russia and China. And HST-DV can cruise Mach 6 or 6 times the speed of sound. That is what we called as HST-DV. Very important. Even if you forget, remember the word hypersonic. And let's take a random look at DRDO's. Lot of things to remember. I think you don't have to remember all the names, but if you see something in the prelims paper, you should know all these names. Something called as QQAD, quantum key distribution, the QRNG, ATMG, the laser guided anti-tank guided missile, the supersonic missile assisted release of torpedo called SMART. Something called as, what do you mean by SMART? Smart in defense means what? Supersonic missile assisted release of torpedo. And NGARM, which means anti-radiation missile systems. Pinaka is something that you know, rocket missile system of India, Pinaka. And what do you mean by QRSAM? It's called quick reaction surface to air missile, and MRSAM, and something called as JVPC, joint venture protective carbine. So all these are defense related systems. You don't have to remember all this, but still have a familiarity. Make these terms familiar. When you hear about all this, it will be very difficult for you to remember. Even I find it very difficult to remember all this. But even you don't remember anything, make sure that you remember about HSTDV and the concept of scramjet, ramjet, and hypersonic speed, and all the important concept. And in short, remember about the concept of DRDO. Moving on to flash flood guidance services. What do you mean by flash flood guidance services, which is the first of its kind in Asia? So what is this guidance service, and what do you mean by basically flash flood? Define flood. So flood is not something that is new to India. In different parts of India, you must have seen that states and regions affected by floods. So it is not something very new. And in this context, from the news, I've picked out few things which can be asked or which may not be asked, but I think all these were important. What do you mean by the word across? What do you mean by across? And what do you mean by O smart? What if we get a question in prelims regarding O smart across something called as digital ocean? And IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is something that people know. Intergovernment Oceanographic Commission is that what we're talking about. Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, IOC, digital, O-smart, across. What do you mean by ART? So there are many things to study, so we don't have time to learn everything, but still you need to know what does this acronyms or the words mean. So with this context of flash flood, let's discuss all those concepts and learn them one by one. What is across? Atmospheric and climate research modeling, observing systems and services. If you find somewhere across means this. And flash flood services is something that is launched first of its kind in South Asian countries, namely India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal and Sri Lanka. Which of the following countries have flash flood guidance services? You can mark India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka. All these are popular here. ART is something that you can see in Madhya Pradesh. They talk about establishing an ART, which is called as Atmospheric Research Test Bed. So when you hear about ART, it means Atmospheric Research Test Bed. So let's discuss the next important point. You have to find about the areas called as GEFS, which means all these are acronyms. Okay, you don't have to remember all this, but keep in mind some of the most important one. GEFS, International Grand Global Ensemble, TIGE, and very, very important one. It can be a question. What do you mean by GRAP? Graded Response Action Plan, which is air quality related. So you need to know what do you mean by a GRAP. It is important, definitely very, very important. GRAP is important. And O-smart, this is something which we discussed. O-smart is related to what? O-smart has appeared in the newspapers. O-smart relates to what? Let's take a close look at that. Ocean Services Modeling Application Resources and Technology. That means when you hear the word O-smart, it relates to ocean technology, ocean related technology, resource modeling, etc. And Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, UNESCO, they have created something called as Certificate of Recognition for Tsunami Ready. And which state in India has got that? Normally they don't ask such which state, but definitely if you get a statement question, you need to be prepared for that. It was actually conferred in Odisha. You can check in Odisha. And digital ocean is something that we discussed. And prepared a coastal quality index map. So all these are important areas. So if you get a question, coastal water quality index, it is actually for Andhra Pradesh. They have created a coastal water quality index. And if you get a question, where in India a low temperature thermal desalination plant is coming up in Lakshadweep. And in the same context, that is why we discussed a lot of things like this. If you get a statement for the prelims examination, statement number 1, a low temperature thermal desalination plant is coming at Kalpani in Lakshadweep, and the certificate of recognition, certificate Tsunami Ready, has been conferred upon communities in Odisha. If you get a statements like this, these statements are perfectly right. So such statements can be used in such situations. And then we have to discuss about the concept of GRAP. GRAP is the most important here, and let's check out what do you mean by GRAP. So in this context, what do you mean by GRAP? It is basically an emergency measure. Very, very important to be noted. GRAP is basically an emergency response. And GRAP, when you hear the word GRAP, the first thing that should come into your mind is air quality. So whenever you see that the air quality is deteriorating, GRAP comes into force. And people say a GRAP is also incremental in nature. So in this context of emergency measure, air quality deterioration and incremental, let's find out what do you mean by GRAP. It is approved by the Supreme Court in 2016, and the most important point comes here: when air quality deteriorates, GRAP makes this important turn. It works as an emergency measure, and it does not include any actions normally, but normally it's incremental because when the air quality moves from poor to very poor, measures listed both sections have to be followed. And take a look at this. When the GRAP reaches severe plus, GRAP normally means shutting down schools, implementing odd even rod space rationing scheme, etc. So basically, you must have seen that why GRAP is important here. So that was regarding GRAP. So I think in this random, you remember the concept of OSMART. You remember a lot of things: ART, OSMART, Digital Ocean, GRAP, IOC, Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and a lot of things related to that. So this was the most important things related to random terms. The next in line is the Asian Development Bank, or the ADB. You must have read about ADB. And why ADB? Because you need to know something about ADB, the configuration, some things about ADB, because when you take the current affairs, you see ADB repeatedly coming in the news, because different states in India, whether it be a energy or a power related thing, everything, water related stuff, everything, ADB is actually funding a lot of states in India. So that is why ADB is staying in the news. So in this context, let's find out few things about ADB. Where is ADB located? You must have heard about ADB. How many members are there? So basically, it wants to create an inclusive, that's a word, it wants to create an inclusive, sustainable plus resilient Asia plus Pacific. That means its members are coming from Asia and Pacific, and on total, they want to eradicate poverty in the region. How many members are there? Started in 1966. From 66 onwards, Manila, Philippines was a favorite destination. So all these points, ADB wants to create an inclusive, sustainable, resilient and a poverty-free Asia and Pacific. So Asia and Pacific are very, very important in these concepts. So let's take a close look at it. ADB wants to create all the things that we mentioned. From 1966, ADB has grown to encompass 68 members for 49 from within Asia and 19 from outside. Is India a member of ADB? Yes, India is a member of ADB. So keep in mind about ADB because a lot of schemes are based from ADB. So know something about ADB. Moving on to the next important topic, very much in current affairs, is something that is called as the RODTEP scheme implemented. They talk about this. What do you mean by this RODTEP scheme? What is this? It means remission of duties and taxes on exported products. What are we talking about when you talk about all these things? So before we see that, there was something called as MEIS, and from now onwards, from Jan 1, 2021, MEIS is actually been replaced by what is called as RODTEP, and basically you have a concept of refunds coming here. I'll tell you, there is an angle of refunds which is coming here. Previously, in the regime of MEIS and in the other sectors, you see that some taxes or the sum amount which were basically embedded in taxes, and duties were not recoverable. And from now, the RODTP is actually a great boost to exporters. So great boost to exports because you get proper refunds. That is one important area that should be remembered. And there is also a WTO angle coming here, because there was a recent tussle or a fight between USA and India, because USA challenged India's export subsidy. Very, very important. They challenged India's export subsidy schemes, and they say that it is not in good health and not in good competition. So WTO gave a verdict against India. So India got a verdict which was more in favor of USA. So India had to withdraw a lot of export subsidy schemes. That is a very, very important. And in this reason, RODTEP becomes very important, because India adopted this scheme in order to be more WTO compliant. So that is the story related to this. First of all, you need to know MEIS. I'm just trying to make it simple. MEIS is replaced from Jan 1, 2021. You have RODTEP, and in this context, remember about the concept of refunds which were previously not recoverable. Now you get refunds, and this is basically to create a big push to exports in India. And also remember the angle of WTO. And when you talk about WTO, remember about USA and India. USA challenged India on the context of what? Export subsidy. They challenged the export subsidy, and USA won that. It went against India and won in favor of USA. So according to that, India had to withdraw a lot of export subsidy schemes. So this is basically the story that we have to discuss here. So let's take a close look at what do you mean by that. RODTEP stands for remission of duties and taxes on export products, which we know, and it is coming from this Jan 1st, replace existing MEIS, which means merchandise exports from India scheme. So MEIS is something that is replaced here, as we have just discussed. And take a close. The scheme will ensure that exporters will receive the refunds which were not previously non-recoverable. So that means refunds on embedded taxes and duties are now accessible. Moving on to the next one. Yeah, this is basically to boost the export in India. And now let's take a key look at what you mean by the WTO. WTO, you know WTO, and I told you about the dispute that happened between WTO and they challenged India's export subsidy schemes, and the panel further recommended that export subsidy programs to be withdrawn. This leads to the birth of RODTEP. That's very important. So you know the WTO story, and after that, so let's take a close look at a question. Which of the following were some of the export subsidy programs recommended to be withdrawn by the WTO? If you get a question like this, let's see what happens. 4 options: merchandise exports for scheme from India, special economic zone scheme, biotechnology park scheme, duty-free imports for exports. Which of the following statements are correct? You have the options 1 and 4, 2, 3, 4, 2 and 4, all of the above. Very much current affairs and very much related to economics. How many will get an area? Which of the following are, which I said, export subsidy programs recommended to be withdrawn by the WTO? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think all of the above, all the statements are supposed to be withdrawn by WTO. So which are the following schemes which are going to be withdrawn? Export oriented scheme, electronics hardware technology park scheme, biotechnology park scheme, export promotion capital goods scheme, special economic zone scheme, duty free imports for exporters scheme, So these are some of the areas or some of the schemes that will be withdrawn. And why is it withdrawn? Because of WTO dispute between USA and China. I think it is pretty clear now, and why RODTEP is also very important concept in this. So this is an important area regarding WTO. What about a cosmic dinosaur in the Milky Way? So we are going to discuss something about the cosmic dinosaur, and as you can just see, what are the few things that we have to study in this? NGC 2808, what is this? And what do you mean by a globular cluster? An ultraviolet imaging telescope called as UVIT AstroSat. What is AstroSat? India's something first AstroSat, and the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram or the HR diagram. So you have to find out in this, what do you mean by NGC 2808? Is it a Milky Way or is it a galaxy? And what do you mean basically by a globular cluster? What does globular cluster mean? And UVIT, why is ultraviolet imaging telescope basically used? And what are the roles? What is the role played by AstroSat? And what is basically AstroSat? And this Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. All these are very popular, and that is what is called as a cosmic dinosaur in the Milky Way. So you need to understand a few things. First of all, we are talking about basically a globular cluster. What do you mean by a globular cluster? Globular cluster are a group of spherical collection star. That means they look like spherical connections. They are all spherical in shape, spherical collections of stars. That is what is meant by globular clusters. So basically, and they have high stellar densities. The globular clusters have high stellar densities and basically are spherical collection. That is a word which means globular, means they are spherical in nature. And the key question, why are they in the news? The globular cluster is being discussed basically because we need to find big stars. Sometimes some stars are even so many times brighter than the sun. Why is that so? So this is the basic study that we have in this. So with NGC, we need to find out NGC, UVIT, AstroSat, and what do you mean by, and sometimes you see that this globular cluster, which we say are excellent laboratories. Globular clusters are excellent laboratories for the scientists to study what? You can study the birth and the death or the last phases of every star or different generations of stars. That is very important. You can study the different evolutions of stars. That means from the birth and to the next level of evolution. That is what is called normally what we say birth and death. Here in this globular cluster, it gives you an important analysis, because that is why it is called as a perfect laboratory, because it allows a scientist to study the evolution and different stages from the birth to the last or the different phases of every stars. That means they can measure the brightness, what are the features that it displays. So this is what makes this important. So let's take a close look at what do you mean by NGC. And they talk about a massive intriguing globular cluster which is called as NGC 2808. So basically this is a galaxy that we are talking about, NGC 2808. And the key point is, it is said to have at least 5 generations of stars which has got hot IV bright stars in it. That means it has 5 generations of at least which has displayed UV bright stars in it. So 5 generations, and NGC 2808 is nothing but it is a name of a galaxy. Now let's see the other point. And what do you mean by globular cluster? Globular cluster, as I said, is a spherical collection of stars, and that is why they have a very high, you can just see they are basically spherical and they have high stellar densities towards their centers. That is the point that we made. And then we have the key point. Globular clusters are called as dinosaurs of the universe because you can understand how the stars evolve through various phases between the birth and death. That is the point which I mentioned earlier. They act as a perfect laboratories because you need to study the birth and death. You can study the whole generation of stars in globular clusters with high stellar densities and basically spherical shape. And let's see the another point. What is UVIT? As we said, it is ultraviolet imaging telescope on board India's first multi-wavelength space satellite, nothing else, called as AstroSat. So in this context, it is very clear what do you mean by AstroSat. These are the questions that I asked in the beginning. So AstroSat is India's first multi-wavelength space satellite, and UVIT is ultraviolet imaging telescope. And how are they functioning here? Let's take a look. And there are some stars even which is 3000 times brighter than the sun. Very interesting to note that. And what do you mean by the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram? It is actually a process, and there are many other techniques. So what are the basic process which tries to explain this? The basic process is there are many theoretical models. There are many models, and Hertzsprung-Russell diagram is actually one of the models which actually studies the characteristics of a parent star. This is a parent star, and the future evolution of that stars is actually measured. That means there are various future generations like this, which is actually evolving from the parent star. So this is the parent star, and there are many future evolution of stars. So there are many theoretical models which study the evolution of a star, the parent stars, to the next generation. So the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram is one such theoretical model which is actually involved in this. So next time if you get a question in the prelims, the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram or the Hertzsprung-Russell appeared in the news, it is related to what? It is actually related to the Milky Way galaxy. You can study about the stars, evolution, etc. So these are the important point which we said. And yes, so these are the important points. I think now you have an important idea regarding what you mean by NGC, globular cluster, UVIT, AstroSat, and Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. So all this appeared in the current affairs. So let's take a quick look at the next important topic, which is called as serving employees to get disability compensation. Wow, it's absolutely a good decision by the government of India, the Ministry of Defence, because previously I don't think there were many rules which gave serving employees, especially in the different forces, the paramilitary forces, the young people, CRPF, all those people who have not getting disability compensation. So the point is, if you are in the line of duty, and if you get hurt, if you get disabled, you are entitled to what is called as a disability compensation. So this is also an important step in the current affairs. So let's see and find out the important aspects. Disability compensation for serving employees if they get disabled in the line of duty while performing their service. So that is a key important point. So earlier, the disability provisions under Central Civil Services, the CSS EOP rules, did not provide such compensation to those government servants who were appointed under the national pension system. So now disability compensation who gets disabled in the line of duty is a good measure indeed. So this is an important current affair that you should know. So that was a quick thing which we discussed, and moving on to the next important topic, National Police K9 Journal. What do you mean by this? If you get a question, the National Police K9 Journal, the K9 Journal appeared in the news recently. The K9 Journal refers to what? They can ask you many. The K9 Journal refers to what? Space science, policing. They can ask you many options like this. Agriculture. So the K9 Journal is nothing but, it's very clear, the Union Ministry released the inaugural National Police K9 Journal, and that is nothing but publication in the country for the subject of police service canines. That means the canines, the dogs. It is actually related to the police dogs. That is an important point. So K9 Journal is related to the police dogs which is called as a police service, which are called as PSKs. So it is a publication, the first such publication in the country on the subject of police service canines, and that is police dogs. So if you see somewhere relating to canine journal, it's nothing but the PSKs or the police service canines. The next important current affair item that appeared in the news is an authority called as CDSCO. It means CDSCO, which means Central Drug Standard Control Organization. And what does CDSCO do? So it's a time, as you know, the whole world is reeling under the pressure of COVID. So it is also important that drugs and the control of drugs, the quality of the drugs is well debated in this country. So that makes, because CDSCO is a NRA, which means the National Regulatory Authority of India. This is a national regulatory authority, and regarding the drugs, the quality of the drugs, etc. And in this regard, we need to study about what do you mean by the Cosmetics and Drugs Act of 1940. The Cosmetics and Drugs Act is also very important, of 1940 is also very important, and this is important regarding what? This authority, the NRA, the National Regulatory Authority, is important in many terms, like in terms of drugs. What are the distribution of drugs in India? What are the quality of the drugs in India? And especially you must have heard about a thing called clinical trials. Clinical trials. So all these have a big impact, and this organization has got a big impact in all these things, like being an NRA, drugs, quality of drugs, the rollout of drugs, clinical trials, everything is an important aspect of CDSCO. So we'll slowly find out what do you mean by this. And yes, the CDSCO is actually under the Director General of Health Services, Ministry of Health and Family, and it is an NRA, as I said, Regulatory Authority of National Regulatory Authority of India. And the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940 and Rules 1945 have entrusted various responsibility to central as well as state regulators, because in case of certain drugs, specialized category of drugs, you need both the central as well as the state to actually come together. So two things, Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940 is important in this regard. And yeah, the approval of drugs. This is the duty of CDCSO, is responsible for what? Drugs, conduct of clinical trials, laying down the standards of drugs, control over the imported drugs, and all these are important aspects of the Drugs and Cosmetic Act. What if you get a question? Which of the following are the provisions? Because in UPSC Civil Service Prelims examination in the last 6-7 years, you always have one such questions regarding the regulatory authority, or what are the provisions of certain acts. So always such questions appear. If you get a questions for Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940, they are with the approval of drugs, conduct of clinical trials, the standard, the quality, even imported drugs come under the purview of this CDSCO. That makes it important. And as I said, sometimes it works with state regulators to find out things like important critical drugs, blood products, IV fluids, vaccine and sera. So when it comes to vaccine, sera and IV fluids and some special cases of drugs, you need the joint provision of the NRA as well as the state regulators. So that makes everything important in this regard. So please try to remember about CDSCO, what are the functions, and most importantly remember about the Drugs and Cosmetic Act of 1940 and some of the provisions. Okay, so that was CDSCO, and let's quickly move on to the next important area, which is called as Kochi-Mangaluru natural gas pipeline. This was in the news, again a pipeline, and they talk about an important area which is called as One Nation, One Gas Grid, because the country previously talked about One Nation, One Ration Card, and we talked about universalization of PDS, because that is one ration card that has to be discussed. I hope you know about, and the PDS system and how that works, the universalization of PDS in India, which is called as One Nation, One Ration Card. So the portability of ration card is something that appears in current affairs, and I assume that you know that topic well. Now they talk about one nation, one gas grid, and the Kochi-Mangaluru gas pipeline. And in this regard, these are the important areas. You can just see from Kerala, it goes to Mangaluru, connecting, and this is actually built by GAIL, the GAIL India Limited. So you need to know that it is constructed by the GAIL and connects LNG, the liquefied natural gas, from Kochi to Mangaluru or Dakshina Kannada in Karnataka. So that means it connects Kerala to Mangaluru. That is an important thing which we have discussed here. And one more thing, when you talk about the Mangaluru natural gas pipeline, you know that CNG, what do you mean by PNG? People talk about CNG, and what is PNG? We should know what you mean by PNG. And what if you get a question, because this idea talks about something called as HDD, horizontal directional drilling. What do you mean by HDD? The HDD is something, a new technique which was actually adopted to create this Mangaluru natural gas pipeline, because this area, when you see from Kochi to Mangaluru, it connected a lot of river sources, at least minimum more than 100 plus areas where the gas pipeline needs to be connected. And for that, GAIL this time used a technique called as HDD, horizontal directional drilling. That is what is called as HDD. We'll find out what you mean by HDD. Yes, this is what is meant by horizontal directional drilling method. So let's take a look at this. This was an engineering challenge. That is what I said. An engineering challenge. Crossing over more than 100 locations was a difficult challenge, and that is what is called as horizontal directional drilling. So MCQs can be there because this appeared in the current affairs. And PNG is nothing but piped natural gas, and CNG. So you should know what you mean by piped natural gas. What if you get a question for which of the following statements regarding PNG are correct? What if you get a question for prelims? What do you mean by PNG is something that you should know. And that was regarding the Kochi-Mangaluru gas pipeline. So that became an important area of discussion. Next, we have something called as Sagarmala Seaplane Services. That is SSPS. You're getting a lot of abbreviations in current affairs relay, because you don't have to remember all those, but having a familiarity, that is very important. Be familiar with the words when you hear seaplane services. It is Sagarmala Seaplane Services. And what is a seaplane does? And this is seaplane. We have to discuss which are the possible routes or the geographical locations that are being explored. What are the geographical areas that is being explored under SSPS or Sagarmala Seaplane Services? Very important to note. And already there is a service in Ahmedabad which is already existing. And you need to know a lot of geographical pinpoints. I would call pinpoints because they are pinpoints basically, because you get a lot of questions in match the following. Which of the areas are correctly matched in prelims? And if you get a question, a match the following questions like this in prelims, you need to have that clear-cut idea. Say, imagine you have this plan coming up in Andamans, Lakshadweep. So you need to know about all this. And what are the biggest advantages of having a seaplane? Because one aspect is tourism. People talk about tourism. Tourism is the most important area which needs to be built, and there is an important concept called accessibility. Why accessibility? Because not every place in India is connected through airways. Because if you need to construct an airport, you need to have a lot of terminals. You need to have a lot of area for runway and a lot of land acquisition. That means and sometimes it has to be in good proximity. Geographically it has to be accessible, and geographically it has to be good. So there are a lot of, you need to construct a lot of terminals, runways, land acquisition, good proximity, geographical accessibility. All these are very important to have airway connectivity. But this time, when you talk about a seaplane, you can see in this picture, you don't need those big runways and terminals, because you use the natural sea space or the waterways, the water, to make landings and takeoffs. So that is a good way to connect a large area in India and give good boost to travel, logistics, as well as boost tourism in a large scale sectors. So now let's discuss what are the few places which have been discussed in this. So let's discuss the few areas that they talk about. They talk about the Sagarmala seaplane service is actually implemented through Sagarmala Development Company Limited, which is called as the SDCL. And what are the places that we talk about? There are already existing in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Lakshadweep, Guwahati in Assam. And what if we get a match the following? Where is Umrangso Reservoir? It is in Assam. Yamuna, Delhi, Ayodhya, Tehri, Srinagar, Uttarakhand, Chandigarh, and Punjab, Mumbai, Shirdi, Lonavala, Surat, Dwaraka, Mandvi, Kandla, Khinsi Dam, Nagpur, Irai Dam, Chandrapur in Maharashtra. So all these are important areas. I suggest that you freeze this video, pause it for a time, and find out the important locations which are being connected. What if the Sagarmala seaplane services, which of the following statements are right? Which of the following places are possibly going to be connected? If you get Umrangso, or match the following: Umrangso and Tehri. If you get the Khinsi Dam and you get a location, if you are asked to match the following, you should be able to have an answer. That is what is important. So, and in this you can clearly see the geographically Yamuna, the Tehri, Srinagar, Ayodhya, the Umrangso Reservoir. What if you get a question? Previously they asked questions giving you a map. They give you a map like this and they ask you to identify a place. It is Umrangso, Lonavala, Lakshadweep, Mumbai, Shirdi, and lot of places, Dwaraka, Kandla. So this map is also important. That means know the places clearly well. And that's what we said. There is already a seaplane service existing in Kevadia and Sabarmati River in Ahmedabad, which was started in 2020. So already a existing thing. And as I said, why seaplane is going to be an advantage? Because you don't need that runway, terminal buildings, etc., which I already said. And it provides great air connectivity throughout this country, irrespective of the challenges that you have to construct an air system in India. So this is going to be a good beneficial thing, and it will save a lot of travel time and stimulate localized short distance in the hilly regions and across river waters and lakes. So definitely seaplane service is going to be a good thing for India. Next is an important topic that we'll discuss about the expedition to Antarctica. That is also very crucial in this. What is the expedition of Antarctica, and what is the history of India's expedition to Antarctica is also something that we need to discuss. There are a lot of important points to be discussed here. In this context, you need to understand what do you mean by an NCPOR, which is actually taking care of all the activities. And it's been almost 40 years, close to 40 years, that from 1981 India is actually operating in the Antarctic regions with expeditions, and you have the permanent bases. How many bases do India have in the Antarctic? Have you heard about the Dakshin Gangotri, the Maitri, and the Bharati? So there are stations working in the Antarctic. So Dakshin Gangotri, Maitri, Bharati are all important, happening from almost 40 years. India's expedition is this. You need to know what you mean by NCPOR, which controls things there. And there is a protocol, very important, which is called as COMNAP. If it is related to Antarctica, there is an international protocol which is called as COMNAP. So we need to understand all these concepts when you talk about the issue of Antarctic expeditions in India. And let's check it out. And India launched the 40th scientific expedition, which, to be noted, almost 40th expedition is being launched. And the southern white continent, and the 40th expedition will be flagged in 2021. Obviously this is happening in 2021. And if you see a vessel, the MV Vasily Golovnin, pardon me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but you have this, the Vasily Golovnin, the research vessel, that is actually a chartered vessel going to Antarctica. If you see something in the prelims paper, the Vasily Golovnin appeared in the news. What is it? It is a nuclear missile. It is a special program, a scientific research done by United States of America. It is a special Cuban missile, and it is a chartered ice vessel to Antarctica. So the answer will be Antarctica's ice vessel. So Vasily Golovnin, remember this, can be asked. you don't predict anything what UPSC asks. So this is all about this. And yes, as I said, in 1981, it's a very old affair, starting from the most important person being Mr. Qasim, who played a pivotal role in creating the Antarctic expedition. So it was actually under the scientist of Dr. Qasim who played a pivotal role. And yes, we have the base stations, the permanent base stations, Dakshin Gangotri, Maitri and Bharati, which we discussed. And 2 operational research stations as of now. We have Bharati and Maitri. And NCPOR is nothing but National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, NCPOR Goa, which manages the entire Indian Antarctic program. So that is what I said in the before session, that NCPOR is nothing but National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, which manages the entire Indian Antarctic program. And again, India is committed to create a COVID-free base station in Antarctic. So, and all these, and let's find out what you mean by a COMNAP or the protocol. This is what you mean by a COMNAP or a protocol. That is, it is called Council of Managers of National Antarctic Program. That is what is called as COMNAP. So next time when you hear something related to COMNAP, you should clearly understand that COMNAP is nothing but a protocol which is called as Council of Managers of National Antarctic Program. So next time you hear COMNAP, it's related to Antarctic. That is an important point to be drawn here. So find about Antarctica, the base stations, etc. All these are important areas that we discussed. Next, moving on, you have something, Swasth Vayu. Again, UPSC can ask questions, short questions. Swasth Vayu appeared in the news. What is it? It is nothing but a new non-invasive ventilator developed by CSIR and AL. So it is going to be a non-invasive ventilator. It has related to the health sector. Just for an understanding, I thought if you hear one word, there are a lot of one-word things you can pick it from the current affairs, which you will not find it anywhere. So Swasth Vayu is basically an invasive ventilator. And what are the most important things that you have to remember? It is actually a inbuilt, biocompatible 3D printed ventilator. It's a 3D printed ventilator, and you have something here called as HEPA. What do you mean by HEPA? Something that got very popularized in the 1950s. HEPA is highly efficient particulate air filter. So if you hear the word HEPA, HEPA is nothing but an air filter. Very, very important, air filter. And what if you get a question for the prelims? Which of the following are some of the uses of HEPA? You can see medical, nuclear, food industry, processing industry. Which of the following has implication of HEPA or highly efficient particulate air filter? It is actually in the current affairs, so you should know what you mean by HEPA. Let's take a close look at HEPA. This is what you said, HEPA. HEPA air filters are used in the applications of contamination control. So the word is contamination control, such as manufacturing of disk drives, medical devices, semiconductors, nuclear, food, pharmaceutical products, as well as hospitals, homes and vehicles. So if you get HEPA, what do you mean by HEPA? You should remember what is the definition of HEPA that we just marked. HEPA is highly efficient particulate air filter, and it is used in drives, medical devices, nuclear, even in nuclear, food, etc. And you should also know HEPA does not require to filter smoke and fumes. That is, all air purifiers doesn't have a HEPA. So very, very important. Not all the air purifiers have the concept of HEPA. So that is why some of them don't capture some of them don't capture filter smoke and fumes. And so this is a short note about HEPA because it appeared in the news. We thought of making something about HEPA. So know what you mean by HEPA. It is air filter, and know the uses, and it is used for contamination control, and what are the applications, because they have UPSC ask questions, what are the applications of all this. So it's important that we find out HEPA. And let's discuss the other important topic. It is actually a important area which I wanted you to show. If you have not missed out, I think you should take a close look at. Know about the concept of Unnati Jyoti. What do you mean by Unnati Jyoti? And there is a concept of Unnati Jyoti, affordable LEDs, especially Ujala, affordable LEDs for all, called as the Unnati Jyoti, affordable LEDs for all, Ujala, and SLNP, Street Lighting National Program. So this is a campaign, very, very important. You should know about Ujala and SLNP because it is marking the 6th anniversary this year. And remember about EESL, very, very important, because if you get a question in the prelims, both the programs, Ujala is this, SLNP is this, and the second option can be which of the following regarding the power is very important. India's zero subsidy program, they are India's zero subsidy program, statement number 1, and they are actually implemented by EESL, which is called as Energy Efficiency Services. So you should know this concepts clearly. And lot of LED bulbs and what is called as emissions. GHG emissions are very, very important, because this is an important question. You can actually use it for the prelims as well as for the mains. Even in mains, you need to know about the GHG emissions, how such initiatives are helping to create or cut down GHG emissions in India. So know about Ujala, SLNP, and EESL, Energy Efficiency Service Limited. Next, we'll discuss about earthquake monitoring and what is magnetotelluric. It's something that appeared in the current affairs, and you should know in this context, you should know what you mean by MT, what does MT do, and what is NSN, what is the duty of NSN and the seismological network, and what is magnetotelluric MT, what does MT basically do. So earthquakes, you must have heard about seismograph, Richter scale. So earthquake monitoring is very important. Apart from that, you need to know how earthquake happens. Apart from the recordings or the graph which measures the intensity and magnitude of the earthquake, it's important to know why earthquake happens, which are the following areas which are so prone to earthquakes. And magnetotelluric things are very, very important, are processes. So basically they talk about they study the Earth's natural variations. That is a very, very important. They study the Earth's natural variations in actually the Earth's magnetic field as well as the Earth's electrical field. They study the whole thing. They find the geological structures and processes that can trigger an earthquake. And even the studies is focused on a fluid which helps us to understand the level of earthquakes that can happen. So basically speaking, MT, the magnetotelluric, studies the Earth's natural variations of magnetic field and the electric field, and studies the geological structures where you can actually find out what are the possibilities of earthquakes and how earthquakes can actually get real triggers. So this is actually related to the magnetotelluric. So let's closely identify and understand what does it mean. NSN is nothing but National Seismological Network, being operated and maintained by National Seismological Center. So NCS and NSN is nothing but a seismological network. And magnetotelluric is actually something being conducted in the Delhi region. And it is a geophysical method which uses natural time variation of the Earth's magnetic and electrical fields. That's why I said in the previous session, I said it's about the Earth's magnetic and electrical fields. That is very important here. So you need to understand, it understands the geological and structural processes that can trigger earthquakes. Very important to know. And in Delhi, we talk about this is measured or conducted across 3 major seismic sources, which is MDF, Mahendragarh, Dehradun, the Sona fault, the SF, and the MF, the Mathura fault. So these are the regions where they talk about. And these measurements will ascertain the presence of a fluid which generally enhances the possibility of triggering earthquake. So that's why I said it actually ascertain the presence of a fluid, which helps you to understand better. So basically magnetotelluric is a geophysical method using Earth's natural time variation of magnetic and electrical field. So I think in this context it is easy to remember what you mean by a magnetotelluric. So this also appeared in the current affairs. And moving on to the next important topic, and the next topic is PM Cares Fund. You talk about a lot of funds, and UPSC prelims, you find a lot of funds, investment funds, etc. They ask you which are the fund the price stabilization fund, the investment fund, investment infrastructure funds, which are the following features of all those funds, as some questions that they appear in the UPSC examination. And here we have something called as a PM Cares Fund. What do you mean by the PM Cares Fund? You need to understand, in case you can donate, in case of a medical, in case of not only a medical, in case of a public health emergency. That means in case of a health emergency or a public health emergency or a random emergency, if it is a calamity, this fund plays an important part, which is called as PM Cares Fund. And what if you get a question? So in order to understand, it is a public health emergency, it is a calamity, PM Cares Fund is important. And one more thing, when you read about the fund, the composition of the fund is very important. Who is actually heading this? The PM Cares, the word Prime Minister is the most important. The Prime Minister is the ex officio chairperson. Very, very important. The Prime Minister is the ex officio chairperson. And beside the ex officio chairperson, you have the ex officio trustees or the members. The Ministry of Defence, very, very important. Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Home Affairs. So three ministries which are associated. So PM Cares Fund, Prime Minister is the ex officio chairperson. And what is the fund? Why fund? In case of an emergency, a public health emergency, especially like COVID, which is actually a big problem around the world. And if it is a calamity, man-made calamity, any calamities, PM Cares Fund is important. And the composition, Prime Minister is the ex officio chairperson, and the three trustee ex officios, Ministry of Defence, the Ministry of Defence, the Ministry of Finance, and the Minister of Home Affairs. They are important. And the Prime Minister has the power to appoint 3 persons, just like President can nominate few members to Rajya Sabha from literature, science, etc. You have 3 persons who can be chosen from this. So let's find out what do you mean by this. PM Care Fund is a public charitable trust. To be noted, it's a public charitable trust, and it's a dedicated fund with the primary object of dealing any kind of emergency or distress situation like COVID-19. That is a word I used. Emergency situation or a distress situation is a word. And if it is a public health emergency or any kind of emergency, calamity, distress, man-made, natural, or even upgradation of healthcare pharmaceutical facilities, this PM Care Fund is very, very important. So you should know why this fund, health emergency. What if you get a question? It is only devoted to healthcare, upgradation of healthcare, or a natural emergency, and it does not cover a man-made calamity. So that is a false statement. It covers all the statements. And other necessary infrastructure funding or any type of support, PM Care Funds is very, very important. And moving on to the composition, as I said, Prime Minister is the ex officio chairperson, and the trustees, the ex officio trustees are Defence, Home Affairs and Finance. And the next is Prime Minister is the chairperson, and the Board of Trustees, they have the power to nominate 3 trustees. That is a point. They can nominate 3 trustees to the board who shall be from research, health, science, social work, public administration and philanthropy, law. So the Board of the Trustees, the Prime Minister can appoint 3 extra trustees. So this is how. And all the trustees work in pro bono capacity. What do you mean by a pro bono capacities? It is a kind of service, because if a professional or a professional person is offering his or her expertise free of cost or at a low cost, you call that as a pro bono service. Many of the people render pro bono service in India. That is when people like professionals, they render the service free of cost or either with a low cost. That is pro bono capacity. So I think now it's clear what is this PM Cares Fund, why is the fund given, what are the provisions of the fund, and what is the composition of the fund, and the trustees and the members are pro bono capacity. So this is something that has to be noted here. And moving on to the next important topic is the climate of India. I didn't want to give you a few ideas, or you don't have to learn few things. Such statements are very important for UPSC prelims examination, because if you get 2 or 3 statements regarding a particular happening, if you don't know that, it is very, very difficult to identify which of them are correct. This is a classic example of such question that appears in the prelims examination. You can see a classic statement that you can expect in UPSC prelims. The year 2020 was the 8th warmest year on record since nationwide records commenced in 1901. It is the 8th warmest recorded year, 2020. So if you get such questions and statements, you can only get this right only if you know the statements. So know the statements. So this is why I put 3 statements so that you can have an idea. 2020 was the 8th warmest year since 1901 and substantially lower than the highest warming observed in India. 2016 was also a big year as far as the warmest year was concerned. The global mean surface temperature during 2020 is plus 1.2, so the global mean, and the 2020 annual rainfall over the country as a whole was 109% of its long average based on data. The monsoon seasonal rain was above normal, and this was just to give you an idea about few statements. And you get such question: the global mean surface temperature of the world has increased by this, and the rainfall of this country has increased. So basically use this data as statements. We'll quickly move on to the next important topic: tropical storms in the Indian seas. Storms, cyclones are not something new to India. So in the recent times, how many cyclones or storms happened in India? You must have heard about Nisarga, Gati, Nivar, Amphan. So if these are the cyclones or the storms, Nisarga, Amphan, Gati moved in which direction? Was it in the Bay of Bengal or the Arabian Sea? So you need to know the tropical storms in the Indian seas. Let's take a close look at that. During India, 2025 cyclones formed over the northern Indian Ocean. 5 cyclones, and there are super cyclone storms like Amphan, very severe cyclones Nivar and Gati, and severe cyclonic storm Nisarga and cyclonic storm Burevi. So 5 important which happened in northern Indian Ocean. The storms you should know: one are super cyclone Amphan, very severe cyclonic storms Nivar and Gati, severe cyclonic storms Nisarga, and cyclonic storm Burevi. And Nisarga and Gati formed over the Arabian Sea. That is why the geography is very important. Nisarga and Gati in Arabian Sea, while the remaining 3 cyclones formed, while Amphan, Nivar and Burevi formed over the Bay of Bengal. So if you know, classify the Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, you should clearly know that the Bay of Bengal, you have Amphan, Nivar and Burevi in the Bay of Bengal, and you have Nisarga. You have Nisarga and Gati in the Arabian Sea. So these are the tropical storms which happened in India. It's even important to match the following, or you can expect such questions in statements also. So these are the tropical storms in the Indian seas. Let's talk about the next important topic called as a biodigester, with a special reference to what is called as MK2 technology. What if you get a question for the prelims? What do you mean by MK2 technology, and what do you mean by a biodigester? How do you find an answer to this question? In this very specific context of MK2 technology, it talks about DRDO, because we have already discussed DRDO in detail, and it talks about the Maha Metro. What is Maha Metro? The Maharashtra Metro Corporation, the Maharashtra Metro. So DRDO and Maha Metro, and previously DRDO with Indian Railways and many other places have signed and used a concept called as biodigester. So this time DRDO came up with a technology, a green technology called as MK2 technology, which is a advanced biodigester. So Indian Railways is already using biodigester by DRDO. That means the toilets that function in the Indian Railways, the toilets of Delhi, the toilets of the metros, which is apart from many places, all the metros, railways, they have this concept called as a biodigester. So this biodigester is going to be an important topic here. What does the biodigester basically do? So first part, we'll know what is an MK2 technology, and then we'll find out what is the role of biodigester. So let's quickly find out. The DRDO and Maharashtra Metro Rail Corporation are working together to creating the eco-friendly, DRDO's new eco-friendly biodigester unit. So that is MK2 technology, and it is for the human waste treatment in the metro rail network. So even in the Indian Railway, the toilets, the human waste treatment is done by biodigesters, and that is actually happening perfectly. And even though there are so few flaws and incompatibilities reported, biodigesters are working perfectly. The principle is really good. And DRDO's biodigester is indigenous, is green, and it's a cost-effective technology, and one of the rare distinction of having the largest number of DRDO licensees, because a lot of people are subscribing to DRDO's advanced MK2 technology, which is called as a biodigesters. And such a biodigester was successfully tested in the Dal Lake, especially in the houseboats. So wherever you need a toilet facility, or where you need to treat human waste, you need to have a biodigester, and the Dal Lake experiment of biodigester was extremely successful as far as the DRDO is concerned. Now we'll find out how a biodigester actually works. What is a biodigester? A biodigester is basically a system which biologically digests organic matter, either aerobic as well as anaerobic. You know what you mean by aerobic and anaerobic. So it basically biologically digests the organic matter, and the microbes. So there is a process which is called as biologically digesting. You biologically digest the whole system, and the microbes inside that and the bacteria break down that organic matter. So very much popular. This can be used to break down the manures, animal slurry, human waste, are all done in biodigester. So basically you biologically digest the organic matter, and the microbes and bacteria later on they break down it. And since it is a very closed system, there is no order coming out of that. So let's find out what are the important points relating to this. A biodigester is a system that biologically digests organic material, anaerobic without oxygen or aerobically with oxygen. So important point. And the microbes break down the organic matter in a biodigester, just we discussed. And what is it? Most food, fat, greases, animal manure can be processed in a biodigester, and human waste also. And it is a closed system, as I said, so no odor from food waste, and that eliminates flies, rodents from this facility, and that makes us more hygiene. So this is the concept. So when we discuss the concept of DRDO's MK2 technology and biodigesters, it is very important that you know how the biodigester system works and what are the principles involved in this. What are the things that you can break down in a biodigesters? What are the features of biodigesters? What if you get a question for the prelims? Which are the following are features of biodigester? Which of the following statements regarding biodigesters are correct? So from current affairs, it's our duty to perform and prepare all this. Moving on to the next important area, exercise coverage. You have a lot of exercises which happens every year, and in this current affairs relay for 2021, we are preparing an exclusive defense wrap-up where we'll come up with all the important exercises and joint operations of India with other countries and the joint operations of other military and defense forces of the world. So what is coverage? Exercise coverage is nothing but Indian Army, Indian Navy, Indian Air Force and Indian Coast Guard being conducted in the Andaman Nicobar, which is the only joint forces command of the country. So exercise coverage is basically Air Force, Navy, Army and Indian Coast Guard. So exercise coverage, please remember, exercise coverage is an exercise between the defense forces of India. What is India Science? How many of you have heard about something called as India Science? I don't know how many of you have watched this. India Science is nothing but India's first nation's science and technology OTT channel. So you must have heard about this. So India Science is nation's science and technologies OTT channel, India's OTT channel, because it completed its second year in 2021. That takes this India Science in the news, because it is India's official science and technology OTT, because you need to know what you mean by OTT. And Now the current affairs, you need to know what you mean by OTT, because the whole of the country, the whole of the world is talking about OTT platforms. In the wake of COVID, movie theaters have all been shut and the new releases are all coming in OTT platforms. So you need to know what are the features of OTT platforms, how does an OTT platform work. Since I discussed about India Science, I think you by this time you must have already studied about what you mean by an OTT platform. So India Science, India's OTT channel, is managed by Vigyan Prasar, an autonomous organization of Department of Science and Technology. So you can get a question, nation, which of the following statement regarding India Science is right? It is India's official OTT channel. Second, it is managed by Vigyan Prasar. Which of the following statements are true? One and two, both one and one only, two only, neither one and two. So in such questions, you should clearly know what is being discussed. So that was regarding the India Science, and I think we have come and discussed a lot of topics which appeared in the current affairs, especially the source from PIB, Press Information Bureau, and in the preliminary examination, especially in the civil service preliminary examination, you cannot predict where the questions come from. So this was current affairs relay for 2021 prelims, and this was the first set or the first part. We are coming up with such complete current affairs wrap up of 1 year, which will be helpful for 2021 prelims, and all the people who are preparing for prelims this year 2021 will give you a complete 2020 and 2021's current affairs wrap up for 2021. So stay tuned for part 2 of current affairs relay. Keep watching LearnStroke. This is Arjun R. Shaankar.